Before we dive into this story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. The fluorescent lights of Sterling Industries buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting their harsh glow across rows of identical cubicles. Madison Clark sat hunched over her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the desperate intensity of someone who had exactly 12 minutes left on her lunch break and a presentation due in 2 hours. Her strawberry blonde hair was twisted into what could generously be called a bun, secured with a pen she'd stolen from the supply closet because her actual hair tie had snapped that morning. Just another Monday in paradise. Madison's desk was a monument to organized chaos. Coffee-stained Post-it notes formed a colorful border around her monitor, each one a reminder of another impossible deadline, another unreasonable request, another reason why she'd been Googling career alternatives at 3 in the morning. Her coffee mug, emblazoned with "World's Okayest Employee," sat half-empty beside a wilting succulent that she'd optimistically named Gerald and had somehow managed to keep alive for 3 months. "Clark!" The voice cut through the office din like a knife through butter. Madison's shoulders immediately tensed, her fingers freezing mid-type. She didn't need to look up to know who was approaching. The sound of expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished concrete floor was as familiar as her own heartbeat, and twice as likely to give her anxiety. Alexander Sterling materialized beside her cubicle like a storm cloud in a $1,000 suit. At 32, he was the youngest CEO in the company's history, having inherited Sterling Industries from his father and promptly turned it into a tech empire that made other billionaires weep with envy. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his steel gray eyes sharp enough to cut glass, and his jaw looked like it had been chiseled by Renaissance masters who specialized in making women forget how to form coherent sentences. Madison forced herself to look up, meeting his gaze with what she hoped was professional composure rather than the barely contained exhaustion she actually felt. "Yes, Mr. Sterling?" "The Morrison report." "Where is it?" His voice was crisp, efficient, carrying the weight of someone who'd never heard the word "no" and wouldn't recognize it if it introduced itself with a formal handshake. Madison blinked. "The Morrison report that you assigned this morning? The one that requires analysis of 5 years of financial data and market projections?" "That would be the one." "The one you said you needed by end of business tomorrow?" Alexander's eyebrow arched slightly, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both impatience and mild amusement. "I said I needed it today, Clark. End of business today." Madison felt her eye twitch. She was certain, absolutely certain, he'd said tomorrow. She had it written down somewhere in her maze of Post-it notes. But Alexander Sterling didn't make mistakes, according to Alexander Sterling. And contradicting him was like arguing with gravity, generally futile and likely to end with something falling. "Of course," she said, her smile so bright it could have powered a small city. "End of business today. No problem at all." Alexander studied her for a moment, his gray eyes searching her face as if trying to decode some hidden message. Madison felt heat creep up her neck under his scrutiny. He had this way of looking at people like he could see straight through them, past all their carefully constructed professional facades to the person underneath. It was terrifying and oddly thrilling at the same time. "Good," he said finally, then turned and walked away, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive cologne and Madison's rapidly escalating panic. The moment he was out of earshot, Madison slumped forward, her forehead hitting her desk with a soft thud. "Gerald," she whispered to her succulent, "I think your mom might be updating her resume tonight." She straightened up, cracked her knuckles, and opened a new browser tab. Her fingers moved with muscle memory, typing the familiar web address. Google appeared on her screen like an old friend, its cheerful logo mocking her professional despair. Madison glanced around the office, making sure no one was watching, then leaned forward and began typing. How to quit a job without notice. She paused, deleted it, tried again. How to survive on ramen noodles and spite. Delete. Ways to make your boss disappear legally. Delete, delete, definitely delete. Finally, she settled on how to fire your billionaire boss. The search results were disappointingly unhelpful. Apparently, the internet hadn't yet figured out how an underpaid marketing coordinator could overthrow a tech mogul. Who knew? Madison spent the next few minutes diving down various rabbit holes. Signs your boss might be a sociopath. How to tell if you're having a nervous breakdown at work. Jobs that don't require human interaction. Each search felt like a small rebellion, a tiny act of defiance against the impossible standards and endless demands that had become her daily reality. She was deep into an article about remote lighthouse keeper positions when her computer screen suddenly went black. Madison frowned, jabbing at the power button. Nothing happened. She checked the cord, wiggled the mouse, performed the ancient ritual of percussive maintenance by tapping the monitor gently. Technical difficulties. Madison jumped, spinning around to find Alexander standing behind her again. How did he move so quietly in those expensive shoes? It was like he'd taken stealth classes from ninjas. Just a minor glitch, Madison said, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal. I'm sure it's nothing. Probably just needs a restart. Alexander moved closer, and Madison caught that scent again, something clean and masculine that made her forget momentarily why she was supposed to dislike him. He leaned over her shoulder, his presence warm and solid behind her as he examined her computer. Have you tried turning it off and on again? He asked, and there was something in his voice, a hint of amusement that made Madison's stomach flutter in a way that was entirely inappropriate for the workplace. I was just about to, she stammered, acutely aware of how close he was, how the expensive fabric of his suit jacket brushed against her shoulder. Alexander reached past her, his arm grazing hers as he held down the power button. The computer hummed back to life, and Madison held her breath as the screen flickered and displayed her desktop. Please don't show the browser history, she thought desperately. Please, please, please. But the universe, as usual, wasn't listening to Madison Clark's prayers. Her browser reopened, helpfully restoring her previous session. And there, in all its mortifying glory, was her Google search. How to fire your billionaire boss. Time stopped. Madison felt the blood drain from her face, then rush back up in a wave of heat that probably made her look like a sunburned tomato. She could hear Alexander's breathing behind her, could feel him reading the screen over her shoulder. This was it. This was how her career ended, not with a bang, but with a Google search that would probably become office legend. She turned slowly in her chair, prepared to face her execution with whatever dignity she had left. Alexander was staring at the screen, his expression unreadable. Madison opened her mouth to apologize, to explain, to beg for mercy. But before she could speak, something extraordinary happened. Alexander Sterling, Billionaire CEO, began to laugh. It started as a quiet chuckle, barely audible above the hum of office activity. Madison stared at him in bewilderment, wondering if she was witnessing some kind of executive breakdown. But then the chuckle grew into a genuine laugh, rich and warm and completely unexpected. Alexander's perfectly composed facade cracked, revealing something human underneath, and Madison felt her world tilt slightly off its axis. Fire your billionaire boss? Alexander managed between laughs, his gray eyes bright with amusement. Points for specificity, Clark. Though I have to ask, did you find any helpful tutorials? Madison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to fire her, not laugh at her obvious insubordination. That is, it was just research, Alexander suggested helpfully, his lips quirking upward in what might have been a smile. Market analysis, perhaps? Checking the competition. Stress relief, Madison blurted out, then immediately regretted her honesty. I mean, hypothetical stress relief. Not that I'm stressed. I love working here. Sterling Industries is a wonderful place to slowly lose one's sanity. The last part slipped out before she could stop herself, and Madison clamped her hand over her mouth in horror. But instead of looking offended, Alexander laughed harder. Slowly, he asked, raising an eyebrow. I'll have to work on my efficiency. Madison stared at him, completely bewildered. This was not the Alexander Sterling she knew. The Alexander Sterling she knew didn't make jokes. He certainly didn't laugh at subordinates who Googled ways to overthrow him. He was supposed to be cold, calculating, utterly humorless. Yet here he was, looking almost human. I should probably explain, Madison said weakly. Please do. I'm fascinated by your research methodology. Madison took a deep breath, preparing to grovel appropriately. It's just that sometimes, when the deadlines are impossible and the coffee machine is broken and my hair tie snaps and Gerald is looking wilted, I might occasionally hypothetically wonder what it would be like to not work here anymore. Gerald? Madison gestured to her succulent. He's very judgmental for a plant. Alexander glanced at the drooping succulent, then back at Madison, his expression thoughtful. And these hypothetical wonderings led you to Google? Google has answers for everything, Madison said defensively. Usually, although apparently no one has figured out how to fire a billionaire boss. The internet is surprisingly unhelpful on that front. Disappointing, Alexander agreed solemnly. What other career advice have you been researching? Madison felt her cheeks burn. You really don't want to know. Try me. She glanced at him, trying to determine if this was some elaborate trap or if he was genuinely curious. His expression seemed sincere, but she'd learned not to trust her instincts when it came to reading Alexander Sterling. Well, she said slowly, there was the lighthouse keeper thing, and I may have looked into professional dog walking. Oh, and freelance food critic, but that one seemed unrealistic since I once burned water. You burned water? Don't ask, it's a talent. Alexander was quiet for a moment, studying her with those sharp gray eyes. Madison shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, wondering what he was thinking. Then, unexpectedly, he pulled up a chair and sat down beside her desk. Tell me, he said, what would it take to make you want to stay? Madison blinked. Stay? Here, at Sterling Industries. What would make you stop researching alternative careers involving lighthouses and dogs? The question caught her completely off guard. She'd expected termination, not whatever this was. Are you seriously asking? I'm seriously asking. Madison looked around the office, at her cluttered desk, at Gerald the judgmental succulent, at the fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly green. I don't know. I mean, the work itself isn't terrible. It's just impossible, she said honestly. The deadlines, the expectations, the way you appear out of nowhere, like some kind of business ninja. It's like working for a very attractive tornado. Alexander's eyebrows rose. Very attractive? Madison's face flamed. I didn't say that. You definitely said that. I meant, the metaphor was about unpredictability, not. Madison buried her face in her hands. Can we pretend I didn't say that? Absolutely not, Alexander said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. That's going in my performance review notes. Employee thinks boss is attractive tornado. I hate you, Madison mumbled into her hands. No, you don't, Alexander said, with certainty that was both infuriating and oddly comforting. You hate the job sometimes, maybe, but you don't hate me. Madison peeked at him through her fingers. How do you know? Because people who hate me don't Google creative ways to fire me. They just quit. Maybe I'm too broke to quit. Maybe, Alexander agreed. Or maybe you like the challenge more than you want to admit. Madison lowered her hands, studying his face. There was something different about him today. Something softer around the edges. Why aren't you firing me? For what? Having a sense of humor about a difficult situation? For being honest enough to admit when you're overwhelmed? Alexander shrugged. Besides, anyone creative enough to Google how to fire your billionaire boss is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need around here. You're insane, Madison said, but she was smiling despite herself. Probably, Alexander admitted. It comes with the territory, though I prefer eccentric billionaire to insane. It sounds more mysterious. Madison laughed, a real laugh that bubbled up from somewhere she'd forgotten existed. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone less human. Alexander's expression grew thoughtful. I get that a lot. It's easier for people if I'm just the cold, demanding boss. Keeps things simple. But you're not just that. No, he said quietly. I'm not. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the office noise fading into background. White noise. Madison felt something shifting between them, some invisible barrier dissolving. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely inappropriate for a workplace conversation. So, Alexander said finally, about that Morrison report. Reality crashed back down. Right, the impossible deadline. What if I told you it wasn't actually due until tomorrow? Madison stared at him. What? I may have misspoken earlier. It's due tomorrow, end of business. You mean I was right the first time? You were right the first time. Madison felt a surge of vindication. Then why did you say today? Alexander's smile was almost sheepish. Because I wanted to see how you'd handle the pressure. And because you looked like you needed a challenge. You tested me? Madison's voice rose slightly. You deliberately gave me an impossible deadline to see if I'd crack? Yes. That's... Madison searched for words. That's completely insane. I prefer eccentric, Alexander reminded her. Madison shook her head, torn between admiration and exasperation. You're lucky I didn't actually quit. Are you kidding? Alexander stood up, straightening his jacket. After that Google search history, I'm never letting you quit. You're far too entertaining. He started to walk away, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Clark, next time you want to research firing me, try using incognito mode. It sees everything. Madison's face went white. It sees everything? Alexander's grin was absolutely wicked. Everything. Sweet dreams tonight. And with that, he walked away, leaving Madison staring after him with a mixture of horror and something that felt dangerously like attraction. Madison spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of mortified paranoia, jumping every time someone from IT walked past her cubicle. She'd always assumed her internet activity was private, protected by the sacred anonymity of the corporate network. The thought that somewhere in the depths of Sterling Industries' servers was a record of every desperate late-night Google search, every moment of weakness, every how to tell if your coworker is plotting against you inquiry, made her want to crawl under her desk and never emerge. By 5 o'clock, most of the office had emptied out, leaving only the dedicated overachievers and the unfortunates who'd procrastinated themselves into mandatory overtime. Madison fell into the latter category, having spent so much time obsessing over her digital humiliation that she'd barely made a dent in the Morrison report. She stared at her computer screen, trying to focus on quarterly projections and market analysis, but her mind kept wandering back to Alexander's laugh, the way his eyes had crinkled at the corners, the casual way he'd called her entertaining. "Working late again, Clark?" Madison's head snapped up to find Tom Richardson from IT hovering near her cubicle. Tom was the kind of guy who wore graphic t-shirts under his blazers and considered energy drinks a food group. He was also, Madison suddenly realized with dawning horror, the person who had access to her browser history. "Just finishing up the Morrison report," Madison said, her voice pitched higher than normal. "You know how it is. Deadlines and all." Tom nodded sagely. "Oh, I know all about deadlines. Speaking of which, I'm supposed to run a routine security check on all company computers tonight. Standard protocol." Madison's blood turned to ice. "Security check?" "Yeah, just scanning for any suspicious activity, unusual search patterns, that sort of thing." Tom's expression was innocent, but Madison caught something that might have been amusement in his eyes. "Nothing to worry about unless you've been looking up something you shouldn't." Madison forced a laugh that sounded more like a strangled cat. "Of course not. I only use my computer for work-related research. Very professional. Very appropriate." "I'm sure," Tom said, his fingers flying over his tablet. "Though I have to say, some of the search histories I've seen over the years. Well, let's just say, people get creative when they think no one's watching." "Creative how?" Madison asked before she could stop herself. Tom's grin was positively evil. "Let's see. There was the guy in accounting who spent 3 hours researching how to fake your own death to get out of a team-building retreat. And someone in marketing once Googled, 'Is it illegal to put laxatives in your boss's coffee?' Classic stuff." Madison felt herself relaxing slightly. Maybe her searches weren't so unusual after all. Those are surprisingly relatable. Right? Though I have to admit, we don't usually see searches about firing the CEO. That was a new one. Madison's brief moment of relief evaporated. You saw that?" "Clark, honey, I see everything. It's literally my job." Tom leaned against her cubicle wall, clearly enjoying himself. "Though, between you and me, I thought it was hilarious. Especially the follow-up searches about lighthouse keeping and professional dog walking." "Oh God," Madison moaned, burying her face in her hands. "How many people know?" "Well, there's me, obviously. And the security team reviews any flagged searches. And I may have mentioned it to Jenkins in accounting because we have a bet going about which department will have the first nervous breakdown this quarter." Madison peeked through her fingers. "A bet?" "Nothing personal," Tom assured her quickly. "It's just office pool tradition. Though technically, researching ways to fire your boss might count as a pre-breakdown warning sign." "This is a nightmare," Madison muttered. "Could be worse," Tom said cheerfully. "At least you didn't Google how to seduce your billionaire boss." That would have been awkward. Madison's face burned. She had Googled that. Last Tuesday, after Alexander had complimented her presentation, and she'd spent the rest of the day analyzing every word for hidden meaning. Right. That would have been awkward. Tom's expression shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied her face. "Wait. You didn't. Please tell me you didn't." Madison's silence was answer enough. "Oh my God, you did?" Tom's voice rose with excitement. "This is amazing. This is better than the time Williams in HR accidentally sent his love letter to the printer instead of his girlfriend. Please don't tell anyone," Madison begged. "It was a moment of weakness, sleep deprivation. Too much. Caffeine. Temporary insanity. Clark, this is gold. Pure gold. Do you have any idea how boring my job usually is? It's mostly, did you try turning it off and on again, and no, you can't download that suspicious software. But this? This is entertainment." Madison slumped in her chair. "My humiliation is your entertainment." "Pretty much, yeah," Tom agreed cheerfully. "Though for what it's worth, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Sterling's not exactly the type to fire someone for having a sense of humor. If anything, he probably appreciated the creativity. How do you know? Tom glanced around conspiratorially, then leaned closer. Because he asked me not to flag your searches in the security report. Madison's heart skipped. He what? Yeah, called me about an hour ago. Said something about appreciating innovative problem solving and not wanting to stifle creative thinking. Tom grinned. Pretty sure that's corporate speak for, I think she's cute when she's plotting my downfall. Madison stared at him. You're making that up. Scout's honor, Tom said, holding up 3 fingers. Though I was kicked out of Scouts for teaching the other kids how to hack the camp's PA system, so maybe that doesn't count. Before Madison could respond, the soft ding of the elevator announced someone's arrival. Both Madison and Tom turned to see Alexander Sterling stepping onto their floor, looking perfectly put together, despite the late hour. His tie was still straight, his shirt unwrinkled, his hair styled as if he'd just stepped out of a magazine spread. It was deeply unfair that some people could look that good after a full day of work. Richardson, Alexander nodded to Tom. How's the security check going? Just finished up, Tom said, not quite managing to hide his grin. Everything looks clean. No suspicious activity to report. Alexander's gaze shifted to Madison, who was trying to blend into her cubicle wall through sheer force of will. And Clark? Still working on that report? Almost done, Madison managed, her voice only slightly squeaky. Just putting on the finishing touches. Excellent. Alexander's expression was unreadable, but Madison caught something that might have been amusement in his eyes. I'll let you get back to it. Richardson, thanks for staying late. No problem, boss, Tom said, gathering up his equipment. Always happy to help with security. As Tom walked away, still grinning like he'd won the lottery, Alexander approached Madison's desk. She braced herself for another round of professional humiliation, but instead, he simply perched on the edge of her cubicle wall. Long day? He asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. You could say that, Madison replied, not quite meeting his eyes. Though I'm learning all sorts of interesting things about corporate digital privacy policies. Ah, Alexander said knowingly. Richardson got to you. He mentioned that IT sees everything. They do, though I may have suggested that certain searches fall under the category of harmless stress relief rather than security concerns. Madison looked up at him then, studying his face. Why would you do that? Alexander was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. Because everyone needs an outlet. And because honestly, Clark, I'd rather have employees who feel comfortable enough to vent their frustrations than ones who bottle everything up until they explode. Even if those frustrations involve researching ways to overthrow you. Especially then, Alexander said with a slight smile. It shows initiative. Madison laughed despite herself. You have a very unusual management style. I prefer innovative, Alexander corrected. Besides, after reading some of your other searches, I have to admit I'm impressed by your thoroughness. Madison's face flamed. You read all of them? Richardson may have provided highlights, Alexander admitted. The lighthouse keeper research was particularly detailed. Did you know there are only about 1/500 operational lighthouses left in the United States? I did know that, actually, Madison said, surprising herself by engaging in the conversation instead of dying of embarrassment. Most of them are automated now, which really ruins the romantic appeal of lighthouse keeping. Romantic appeal? You know, the solitary figure keeping the lights burning, saving ships from rocky shores, living a simple life surrounded by the ocean. Madison trailed off, realizing how silly it sounded when said out loud. But Alexander didn't look like he thought it was silly. If anything, he looked thoughtful. Sounds peaceful. It does, doesn't it? No impossible deadlines, no meetings, no performance reviews. Just you and the sea, and the certainty that you're helping people. No billionaire bosses to fire, Alexander added with a slight smile. Madison grinned. That's definitely a selling point. Alexander slid off the cubicle wall and pulled up the chair he'd abandoned earlier, settling into it with the casual confidence of someone who owned not just the chair, but the entire building. Madison watched him, still not quite believing that Alexander Sterling, CEO extraordinaire, was choosing to spend his evening sitting in her cluttered workspace, making small talk about lighthouse keeping. So tell me, Alexander said, leaning back in the chair, what other career alternatives have you researched? I feel like I'm only getting part of the picture. Madison hesitated. There was something surreal about this conversation, something that felt like stepping into an alternate reality, where her boss was actually interested in her thoughts, rather than just her productivity. You really want to know? I really want to know. Well, Madison said slowly, there was the dog walking thing, which seemed promising until I researched the startup costs and realized I'd need about 50 regular clients just to afford my current apartment. Then there was freelance food writing, but apparently you need actual qualifications beyond enjoys eating and has strong opinions about pizza toppings. What are your strong opinions about pizza toppings? Alexander asked, and he seemed genuinely curious. Pineapple belongs on pizza, and anyone who says otherwise is a culinary fascist, Madison said firmly. Also, ranch dressing is an acceptable pizza dip, and I will defend that position to my death. Alexander's eyebrows rose. Those are controversial stances. I'm a woman of principle, Madison said with mock seriousness. I stand by my pizza choices, even in the face of social ostracism. Admirable, Alexander said solemnly. What else? Madison found herself relaxing, the familiar rhythm of conversation pushing aside her nervousness. Travel blogger seemed appealing until I realized I'd need to actually travel, which requires money I don't have. Professional organizer was a possibility until I looked at my own desk and realized I'd be committing fraud. Oh, and there was a brief period where I considered becoming a professional wedding crasher, but apparently that's only legal in movies. Professional wedding crasher? Alexander laughed, that same rich, unexpected sound from earlier. How does one even research that? Very carefully, Madison said with a grin, and with a lot of YouTube tutorials about blending in at formal events. Did you know there's a whole art to choosing the right wedding to crash? You want something big enough that one extra person won't be noticed, but not so fancy that your target dress stands out like a sore thumb. You've given this serious thought. I've given all of this serious thought, Madison admitted. That's the problem with insomnia and unlimited internet access. You start researching careers you never knew existed. Did you know there are professional line standers? People who get paid to wait in lines for other people. That's a real job? Apparently. Though the pay is terrible, and you have to provide your own folding chair. Madison shook her head. It's like the universe is conspiring to keep me in corporate America. Alexander was quiet for a moment, studying her with those intense gray eyes. Can I ask you something? Sure, Madison said, though her stomach fluttered nervously. Why do you stay, really? If you've researched all these alternatives, if you're unhappy enough to Google ways to fire me, why haven't you actually quit? The question caught Madison off guard. She'd been expecting more teasing about her internet searches, not genuine curiosity about her life choices. That's complicated. I've got time. Madison looked around the empty office, at the darkened cubicles, and the city lights visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It felt like they were the only two people in the world, suspended in this strange bubble of honesty. Money, mostly. Student loans, rent, the crushing weight of adult responsibilities. But also, she paused, trying to find the right words. Also, Alexander prompted gently. I'm good at this, Madison said quietly. The work, I mean. I complain about the deadlines and the pressure, but I'm actually good at what I do. And there's something satisfying about that, about knowing I can handle whatever impossible task gets thrown at me. Even when the task comes with deliberately misleading deadlines. Madison shot him a look, especially then, because it means I get to prove you wrong. Alexander's smile was slow and warm. I like that about you. What? The way you rise to challenges, the way you refuse to back down even when you're clearly overwhelmed. It's impressive. Madison felt heat creep up her neck. It's probably just stubbornness. Maybe, but it's effective stubbornness. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the office settling around them with the quiet sounds of evening. Madison became acutely aware of how close Alexander was sitting, how the expensive fabric of his suit caught the light, how his presence seemed to fill the small space around her desk. Can I ask you something now? Madison said, surprising herself with her boldness. Fair's fair, Alexander agreed. Why aren't you married? The question popped out before Madison could stop herself, and she immediately felt her face burn. I mean, not that it's any of my business. It's just that you're… She gestured vaguely at him. You know. Rich, successful. Presumably not a serial killer. Presumably. Alexander's eyebrows rose with amusement. Well, I don't actually know for sure, Madison said defensively. You could be very good at hiding it. Rich people can afford excellent body disposal services. Alexander laughed, throwing his head back with genuine delight. Clark, you are absolutely terrifying sometimes. That's not an answer to my question. No, it's not, Alexander agreed, his expression growing more serious. The honest answer? I've never met anyone who was interested in me rather than my bank account. Madison studied his face, noting the slight tightness around his eyes. That must be lonely. It is, Alexander said simply, though I've gotten good at pretending it's not. Is that why you don't date employees? To avoid the whole money complication? Alexander's gaze sharpened. Who says I don't date employees? Office gossip, Madison said, then immediately regretted admitting she'd been listening to office gossip about her boss's love life. I mean, not that I pay attention to gossip. People talk. What do people say? Madison shifted uncomfortably. That you're married to the job. That you've never been seen with the same woman twice. That Sarah from marketing tried to ask you out at the Christmas party and you pretended not to hear her. I wasn't pretending, Alexander said dryly. Sarah from marketing has all the personality of a wet napkin. That's mean, Madison said, though she was trying not to smile. It's honest. Besides, she only asked me out because Jenkins from accounting bet her $50 she wouldn't. Madison stared at him. How do you know about the bet? Clark, I know everything that happens in this office. It's my job. Everything? Madison's voice squeaked slightly. Everything, Alexander confirmed, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Including the fact that you've been researching ways to fire me. We've established that, Madison said weakly, and the fact that you think I'm an attractive tornado. Can we please forget I said that? Absolutely not, Alexander said cheerfully. It's the best compliment I've received in years. Madison buried her face in her hands. This conversation has officially moved beyond professionally appropriate. Good, Alexander said, his voice dropping slightly. I was getting tired of being professional. Madison looked up at him through her fingers, her heart doing something complicated and fluttery in her chest. There was something in his expression, something warm and intent that made her forget how to breathe properly. Alexander, she said softly, then caught herself. I mean, Mr. Sterling. Alexander is fine, he said, leaning forward slightly. I think we're past formalities, don't you? Madison nodded, not trusting her voice. The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility and the weight of everything they weren't saying. "I should probably go," Alexander said, but he made no move to leave. "It's late, and you should get home." "Yeah," Madison agreed, though she found herself hoping he wouldn't actually go. "I should probably finish this report first, though." "The report that's not actually due until tomorrow? That's the one." Alexander smiled, standing slowly. "Don't stay too late, Clark. Gerald looks like he's judging you for your work-life balance." Madison glanced at her succulent, who did indeed look particularly wilted. "Gerald has very high standards." "Smart plant," Alexander said, then paused at the edge of her cubicle. "Madison?" The sound of her first name in his voice made her stomach flip. "Yeah? For what it's worth, I'm glad you Googled ways to fire me instead of actually quitting. The office would be much less interesting without you." And with that, he walked away, leaving Madison staring after him with her heart pounding and her mind racing with the implications of everything that had just happened. Madison sat in stunned silence for a full 5 minutes after Alexander disappeared into the elevator, staring at the spot where he'd been sitting as if she could will him back into existence. Had that conversation actually happened? Had Alexander Sterling, notoriously cold CEO, really spent an hour chatting with her about pizza toppings and career alternatives, like they were friends grabbing coffee instead of boss and employee having the world's most inappropriate workplace interaction? She touched her cheek, which was still warm from blushing, and tried to process what had just occurred. The way he'd looked at her when he said her first name, the way his voice had dropped when he mentioned being tired of professional boundaries, the way he'd seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts rather than just her productivity metrics. It felt like stepping through a looking glass into a world where the impossible was suddenly, terrifyingly possible. Madison shook her head, trying to clear the romantic fog that seemed to have settled over her brain. This was dangerous territory. Alexander was her boss, her billionaire boss, and she was a decidedly non-billionaire employee who Googled career alternatives during lunch breaks. They existed in completely different universes, and the fact that he'd spent an evening being charming and funny didn't change the fundamental reality of their situation. But God, he had been charming and funny. And when he laughed, really laughed, his whole face transformed into something warm and approachable and utterly devastating to Madison's peace of mind. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. A text from her roommate, Emma. "Working late again? Remember, human beings require sleep to function. It's science." Madison glanced at the clock and realized with a start that it was nearly 8 o'clock. She'd been so caught up in her conversation with Alexander that she'd completely lost track of time. She gathered her things quickly, shoving files into her bag and giving Gerald an apologetic pat. "Sorry, buddy," she murmured to the succulent. "I promise to water you tomorrow, and maybe invest in better lighting for both of us." The elevator ride down to the parking garage gave Madison time to replay the entire conversation in her head, analyzing every word and gesture for hidden meaning. By the time she reached her car, an ancient Honda Civic that she'd named Bessie, and that made concerning rattling noises whenever she turned left, she'd convinced herself that she'd imagined the entire thing. People like Alexander Sterling didn't have heart-to-heart conversations with people like her. It just didn't happen. But when she pulled out her phone to check her messages, she found something that made her heart skip. A text from an unknown number. "Don't forget to use incognito mode next time." "Aita." Madison stared at the message, her pulse racing. Alexander had given her his personal phone number. Alexander Sterling, billionaire CEO, had texted her about her Google search habits. This was either the best thing that had ever happened to her, or the beginning of a career-ending scandal that would follow her for the rest of her professional life. She typed and deleted at least 6 different responses before settling on. Noted. Thank you for the IT security lesson. His response came back almost immediately. My pleasure. Sweet dreams, Madison. Madison clutched her phone to her chest and let out a sound that was half laugh, half squeal. Emma was going to absolutely lose her mind when she heard about this. The drive home passed in a blur of city lights and racing thoughts. Madison lived in a small apartment in a converted Victorian house, the kind of place that had character in lieu of modern conveniences and charm instead of adequate heating. She climbed the narrow staircase to the 2nd floor, keys jingling as she unlocked the door, to find Emma sprawled across their tiny living room couch, laptop balanced on her knees and a glass of wine in her hand. Emma looked up as Madison entered, taking in her flushed cheeks and slightly dazed expression. Okay, what happened? You look like you either won the lottery or had some kind of religious experience. I think I had a moment, Madison said, dropping her bag by the door and collapsing into their second-hand armchair. What kind of moment? Emma closed her laptop, giving Madison her full attention. As a psychology PhD student, Emma had an uncanny ability to read people's emotional states, which made her an excellent roommate and a terrible person to have secrets around. The kind where you suddenly realize your entire understanding of reality might be wrong, Madison said dramatically. Honey, you're going to have to be more specific. Did you have an existential crisis or did something actually happen at work? Madison pulled out her phone and showed Emma the text messages. Emma's eyes widened as she read, her wine glass forgotten on the coffee table. Holy shit, Madison. Your boss texted you. Your ridiculously attractive billionaire boss texted you about incognito mode. He's not ridiculously attractive, Madison protested weakly. Emma gave her a look. I've seen the man's picture in Forbes magazine. He's ridiculous attractive and you know it. More importantly, he's flirting with you via text message about your internet browsing habits, which is either deeply romantic or deeply weird, and I honestly can't decide which. It's not flirting, Madison said, though even she didn't sound convinced. Madison Clare, Emma said, using Madison's full name in the way that meant she was about to deliver some hard truths. The man found out you Googled ways to fire him, and instead of firing you, he laughed about it and gave you his personal phone number. That's not normal boss behavior. Maybe he's just being friendly. Friendly bosses don't text their employees about sweet dreams, Emma pointed out. Friendly bosses say, good work on that report, and see you Monday. They don't engage in late-night conversations about your career fantasies and pizza preferences. Madison had told Emma about the conversation during the drive home, calling her on speaker while navigating traffic and trying to process everything that had happened. Now, hearing it reflected back to her, it did sound rather significant. So what do I do? Madison asked, genuinely at a loss. What do you want to do? Madison was quiet for a moment, considering. What did she want? For the past 3 years, she'd thought of Alexander as an impossible standard, a demanding perfectionist who existed in a completely different stratosphere. But tonight, she'd glimpsed something else entirely, a man who was funny and thoughtful and surprisingly lonely, someone who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. I want to see what happens, Madison said finally. I want to know if tonight was a fluke or if there's actually something here worth exploring. Emma grinned. Now that sounds like a plan. Though maybe we should work on your Google search technique. How to date your billionaire boss might be more productive than how to fire your billionaire boss. Madison felt her cheeks heat. I am not Googling dating advice. Too late, Emma said, already typing on her laptop. I'm doing it for you. Let's see what the internet has to say about office romances with significant power imbalances. Emma, no. Emma, yes. This is the most interesting thing that's happened since Mrs. Henderson from downstairs started leaving passive-aggressive notes about our music being too loud. Emma's eyes lit up as she scanned the search results. Oh, this is good. 10 signs your boss is flirting with you. Number 1. Excessive eye contact during conversations. Madison groaned, burying her face in a throw pillow. This is humiliating. Number 2. Finding excuses to spend time alone with you. Emma continued cheerfully. Number 3. Remembering personal details about your life. Number 4. Texting you outside of work hours. Okay, I get it, Madison said, emerging from the pillow. Maybe there were some signs. Some signs? Emma laughed. Honey, according to this article, your boss is basically holding up a neon sign that says, "I'm interested." The only question is what you're going to do about it. Madison's phone buzzed again, and both women looked at it like it might explode. Another message from Alexander. Working late again tomorrow? I might need help with a project. Madison stared at the message, her heart doing that fluttery thing again. Emma peered over her shoulder, reading along. He's asking you to work late with him, Emma said, her voice filled with significance. Alone, in the office, after hours. Maybe he actually needs help with a project. Madison, the man is a billionaire CEO. If he needs help with a project, he has an entire staff of highly qualified assistants. He doesn't need to text his marketing coordinator at 8:30 at night unless he wants to. Madison looked at the message again, trying to read between the lines. Was Emma right? Was this Alexander's way of asking for another chance to talk, to continue whatever had started between them tonight? There was only one way to find out. Madison typed back, "What kind of project?" The response came quickly. The kind that requires someone with innovative problem-solving skills and strong opinions about pizza toppings. Madison couldn't help but smile. Emma read the message over her shoulder and let out a delighted squeal. Oh my God, he's definitely flirting. No one mentions pizza toppings in a professional context. This is happening, Madison. This is actually happening. Madison typed back, "I'll be there," then immediately second-guessed herself and added, "What time?" 7. And Madison? Don't Google anything embarrassing between now and then. Madison laughed, setting her phone aside. No promises. Madison spent the next day in a state of nervous energy that made her coworkers give her concerned looks and ask if she'd switch to espresso for breakfast instead of regular coffee. She couldn't concentrate on her actual work, her mind constantly drifting to the evening ahead and what Alexander might have meant by project. Was it really work-related, or was it an excuse to spend time together? And more importantly, what did she want it to be? By lunchtime, she'd reorganized her desk 3 times, checked her email every 5 minutes, and caught herself staring at Alexander's office door often enough that Jennifer from HR had asked if everything was okay. Madison assured her that, yes, everything was fine. She was just having a very productive day. Thank you for asking. Jennifer looked skeptical, but didn't press the issue. Alexander, for his part, seemed to be conducting business as usual. Madison caught glimpses of him throughout the day, striding purposefully down corridors, standing at the head of conference tables, with his sleeves rolled up and his tie slightly loosened, talking on his phone in rapid, decisive sentences. He looked every inch the powerful CEO, which made Madison wonder if she'd imagined the warmth in his voice the night before. But then, around 3 o'clock, she found a coffee cup on her desk that she definitely hadn't ordered. It was from the expensive cafe across the street, the kind of place Madison considered a special treat rather than a daily necessity. A note was attached. Fuel for innovative problem-solving. Tresta. Madison looked around the office, but Alexander was nowhere to be seen. She took a sip of the coffee and nearly groaned with pleasure. It was perfect. the exact combination of espresso and steamed milk that she preferred, with just a hint of cinnamon. How did he know her coffee order? The answer came in the form of another note tucked under the cup. I asked Tom from IT. He's surprisingly observant about coffee preferences. Madison laughed, shaking her head. Of course, Tom knew her coffee order. Tom knew everyone's coffee order, along with their internet browsing habits and probably their shoe sizes. It was both endearing and slightly terrifying that Alexander had bothered to ask. She spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on work while simultaneously planning what to wear for her evening project. Did one dress professionally for a potentially romantic work encounter? Was business casual appropriate for whatever this was turning into? Madison had exactly zero experience with office romance, having made it a point to avoid dating coworkers after watching her friend Sarah navigate the apocalyptic fallout of a relationship with someone from accounting. By 6:30, most of the office had cleared out again, leaving Madison alone with her nerves and her increasingly elaborate theories about what Alexander might want to discuss. She'd changed her outfit twice in the bathroom, finally settling on a blue dress that was professional enough for the office, but flattering enough to boost her confidence. Her hair was cooperating for once, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she'd even risked a slightly bolder shade of lipstick than usual. At exactly 7 o'clock, Madison knocked on Alexander's office door. His voice called for her to enter, and she stepped inside to find him standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of the city skyline. He'd shed his jacket and tie, his white shirt rolled up at the sleeves, and Madison had to take a moment to appreciate the way the evening light caught in his dark hair. "You came," Alexander said, turning to face her with a smile that made her stomach flip. "You said you needed help with a project," Madison replied, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "I'm nothing if not helpful." "That you are," Alexander agreed, his gray eyes warm with amusement. "Though I should probably confess that the project is somewhat unconventional." Madison felt her pulse quicken. Unconventional how? Instead of answering directly, Alexander gestured to his desk, where Madison was surprised to see takeout containers from what appeared to be several different restaurants. The rich aroma of Thai food mingled with the scent of Italian herbs and something that smelled suspiciously like barbecue. "I realized I don't actually know what kind of food you like besides pizza," Alexander said, looking almost sheepish. "So I may have ordered from 6 different places." Madison stared at the impressive spread of food, then back at Alexander. "You ordered dinner from 6 restaurants?" 7, actually. The sushi place was running late." As if summoned by his words, there was a knock on the door, and a delivery person appeared with a bag from Sakura, the upscale Japanese restaurant downtown. Madison watched in amazement as Alexander tipped the delivery person and added the sushi to the already overwhelming collection of food. "This is insane," she said, but she was smiling as she said it. "I prefer thorough," Alexander replied, echoing their conversation from the day before. "I wanted to make sure there was something you'd enjoy." "Alexander," Madison said softly, using his first name deliberately this time. "You didn't have to do all this." "I know," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "I wanted to." The simple honesty in his voice made Madison's chest tight with something that felt dangerously like affection. This was not what she'd expected when she'd agreed to help with a project. This felt like something else entirely, something that made her pulse race and her carefully constructed professional boundaries blur. "So," Madison said, trying to regain her equilibrium, "what exactly is the project?" Alexander's smile turned slightly mischievous. "I need you to help me understand what makes Madison Clark tick, what she likes, what she dreams about, what makes her Google career alternatives at 3 in the morning. Consider it market research." "Market research for what?" "For figuring out how to convince her to stop looking for ways to fire me and start looking for reasons to stay. Madison felt her breath catch. There was something in Alexander's expression, something vulnerable beneath the confidence, that made her realize this wasn't just about employee retention. This was personal. "That's a pretty ambitious project," Madison managed. "I'm an ambitious person," Alexander replied, "and I have excellent incentive to succeed." "Which is?" Alexander stepped closer, close enough that Madison could catch the scent of his cologne, clean and masculine and oddly comforting. "I've discovered that I very much enjoy making you laugh, and I'd like to keep doing it if you'll let me." Madison's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Alexander, I know this is complicated," he said quickly, as if he could sense her hesitation. "I know there are rules about workplace relationships and power dynamics, and all the very sensible reasons why this is a terrible idea. But I also know that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since yesterday, and I'm hoping that means something." Madison stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You've been thinking about me?" "Constantly," Alexander admitted with a rueful smile. "It's been very distracting. I nearly agreed to acquire a llama farm during a board meeting because I was wondering what you'd think about it." "A llama farm? Apparently they're quite profitable. Also, I thought you might find them amusing." Madison burst out laughing, the tension breaking like a snapped rubber band. "You considered buying a llama farm because you thought it would make me laugh? In my defense, it was a very small farm, more of a llama hobby, really." "Oh my God," Madison said, still giggling. "You're completely insane." "I prefer charmingly eccentric," Alexander said with dignity, though his eyes were sparkling with humor. "And in my further defense, you do have excellent opinions about things. I trust your judgment on llamas. I have never expressed an opinion about llamas in my life." "Not yet," Alexander agreed, "but I have high hopes for your llama-related insights." Madison shook her head, grinning helplessly. "This conversation has officially become surreal." "Good," Alexander said, reaching for her hand. "I was aiming for surreal. Surreal is much better than professional." His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and steady, and Madison felt something shift between them. This wasn't just flirtation anymore, wasn't just an amusing diversion from the mundane reality of office life. This felt real and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "So," Alexander said, his thumb tracing gentle circles over her knuckles, "will you help me with my market research project? I promise the compensation package includes excellent food and possibly stories about my various business meeting mishaps." Madison looked into his gray eyes, seeing warmth and humor and something deeper that made her chest tight with possibility. She thought about all her Google searches, all her career alternatives, all the ways she'd imagined escaping the impossible demands of Sterling Industries. But standing here, with Alexander's hand in hers and the city lights spreading out below them, she realized she didn't want to escape anymore. "I think I can work with that," Madison said softly. Alexander's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. "Excellent. In that case, I should warn you that the Thai food is probably getting cold, and I have absolutely no idea how to use chopsticks properly." "Lucky for you," Madison said, squeezing his hand. "I happen to be an expert in both Thai food and chopstick technique. Consider it part of my consultation services." "I knew you were the right person for this project," Alexander said, leading her toward the desk full of food. "Though I have to ask, what made you change your mind about staying?" Madison thought about it for a moment, looking at the elaborate dinner spread, at Alexander's earnest expression, at the way he'd gone completely overboard just to make her smile. "You convinced me that maybe the job comes with better benefits than I realized," she said finally. Alexander's laugh was warm and rich and full of promise. "Madison Clark, You are going to be the death of my professional reputation." "I certainly hope so," Madison replied with a grin. 2 hours later, Madison was convinced that Alexander Sterling was either the most charming man she'd ever met or a master manipulator who'd somehow learned to weaponize takeout food and self-deprecating humor. They'd worked their way through an impressive array of cuisine, while Alexander regaled her with stories of his various business disasters, including the time he'd accidentally agreed to sponsor an amateur yodeling competition and the incident where he'd shown up to a black tie charity gala wearing a tuxedo t-shirt because his dry cleaner had mixed up his order. "You're making these up," Madison said, nearly choking on her pad thai as Alexander described his attempt to give a presentation, while a borrowed suit jacket slowly disintegrated around him. "I swear on Gerald's honor, every word is true," Alexander said solemnly, raising his hand as if taking an oath. "Ask my assistant. She keeps a file of my public embarrassments for blackmail purposes." "Your assistant blackmails you?" "Margaret has been with the company for 20 years. She's earned the right to mock my fashion disasters." Alexander refilled Madison's wineglass with a Bordeaux that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Besides, someone needs to keep me humble." Madison studied his face, noting the genuine affection in his voice when he talked about his assistant. "You really care about the people who work for you, don't you?" Alexander's expression grew more serious. "They're the reason the company succeeds. I might make the big decisions, but they're the ones who make everything actually work. People like you, who can turn impossible deadlines into polished presentations and make it look effortless." "It's not effortless," Madison said quietly. "Sometimes I feel like I'm barely holding it together. And yet you do hold it together. Every time." Alexander leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes intent. "Do you know what I thought the first time I read one of your reports?" Madison shook her head, suddenly nervous about what he might say. "I thought, finally, someone who actually understands what I'm trying to accomplish here." Alexander's voice was earnest, almost urgent. "You don't just follow instructions, Madison. You anticipate needs. You see connections that other people miss. You find solutions to problems before they become crises. That's not common." Madison felt heat creep up her neck at the praise. "You don't have to say that." "I'm not saying it to be nice," Alexander said firmly. "I'm saying it because it's true. And because I want you to know that when you Google ways to fire me, you're researching how to get rid of someone who thinks you're extraordinary at what you do." "Extraordinary seems like a strong word," Madison said, though she was secretly pleased by the compliment. "Accurate word," Alexander corrected, though apparently not accurate enough to keep you from researching lighthouse-keeping careers. Madison laughed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "In my defense, lighthouse-keeping does sound peaceful. No performance reviews, no impossible deadlines, no billionaire bosses making you question your career choices. But also no Thai food delivery, no high-speed internet, and no opportunities to mock your billionaire boss's fashion. Disasters," Alexander pointed out. "Are you sure you've thought this through?" "Those are fair points," Madison conceded, though I still maintain that the romantic appeal of lighthouse keeping is underrated." "Romantic how?" Alexander asked, and there was something in his tone that made Madison look at him more closely. "You know, the whole isolated but important thing. Standing guard against the storm, keeping the light burning for travelers, being someone's beacon in the darkness." Madison paused, realizing how sentimental she sounded. "It's probably just something I read in a romance novel." "It doesn't sound silly," Alexander said quietly. "It sounds like someone who wants to matter, who wants to know that what they do makes a difference." Madison met his eyes, surprised by the understanding in his voice. "Yeah, I guess that's part of it." "For what it's worth," Alexander said, "you already do that. Maybe not for ships in a storm, but for the people around you. You make their jobs easier, their days better. You make Gerald slightly less wilted just by talking to him. Gerald is a plant, Madison pointed out, though she was smiling. Gerald is a very lucky plant, Alexander replied seriously. He gets to listen to you think out loud every day. Do you know you hum when you're concentrating? It's this soft, unconscious thing that makes everyone around you feel calmer. Madison stared at him. I hum? Constantly. Usually something from whatever musical soundtrack you've been listening to. Last week it was Hamilton for 3 days straight. Alexander's smile was gentle, almost fond. Jennifer from HR mentioned that productivity in your section goes up whenever you're humming, because it means you're in problem-solving mode. People notice that. People notice you, Madison, more than you realize. There was something in the way he said her name that made Madison's pulse quicken. The conversation had shifted into territory that felt both thrilling and dangerous, the kind of personal territory that she'd never navigated with a boss before. Alexander, she said carefully, what are we doing here? Honestly, Alexander set down his wineglass and looked at her directly. I'm trying to convince the most interesting woman I've ever met that I'm worth taking a chance on, despite the fact that I'm her boss, and this whole situation violates about 17 different HR policies. Madison's breath caught. Most interesting woman you've ever met? By a considerable margin, Alexander confirmed. Did you know that most people, when faced with an impossible deadline, either panic or give up? You Google creative solutions and then deliver results that exceed expectations anyway. That's not normal, Madison. That's remarkable. It's probably just stubbornness, Madison said, echoing her words from the night before. Maybe. But it's intelligent stubbornness, paired with creativity, and a sense of humor that makes even your internet search history entertaining. Alexander paused, his expression growing more vulnerable. I've spent the last 5 years building this company, focused entirely on growth and profit margins and market share. And then you show up and make me remember that work can actually be fun, that challenges can be exciting instead of just stressful. Madison felt something warm and fluttery unfurling in her chest. You make it sound like I changed everything. You did change everything, Alexander said simply, at least for me. The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility, and the weight of everything they weren't quite saying. Madison was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how the soft lighting made Alexander's eyes look almost silver, how the expensive wine was making her feel bold in ways that were probably dangerous. This is crazy, Madison said softly. Completely, Alexander agreed. Probably career suicide for both of us. Definitely against company policy, without question. Emma is going to absolutely lose her mind when I tell her about this. Alexander's eyebrows rose. Emma? My roommate. She's been following this situation like it's her personal soap opera. Madison felt herself blushing. She may have helped me research office romance policies last night. And what did your research conclude? Madison bit her lip, debating whether to be honest. The wine made the decision for her. That workplace relationships between supervisors and subordinates are generally discouraged, but not strictly forbidden, provided there's no coercion or abuse of power. Also that most successful office romances involve people who were friends first. Friends first, Alexander repeated thoughtfully. I like that approach. Do you? Madison asked, surprised by her own boldness. Because I have to say, this doesn't feel very friendly. Alexander's smile was slow and warm, and absolutely devastating to Madison's remaining professional resolve. No, it doesn't. Does it? The silence stretched between them, filled with tension and possibility, and the soft sounds of the city far below. Madison felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, wind whipping through her hair, deciding whether to jump or step back to safety. "Madison," Alexander said quietly, and the way he said her name made her decision for her. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed him. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, a question rather than a statement. Madison felt Alexander's sharp intake of breath, the momentary stillness as he processed what was happening. Then his hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing gently along her jawline as he kissed her back with a warmth that made her forget every single reason why this was a terrible idea. When they finally broke apart, Madison found herself staring into Alexander's gray eyes, which had gone dark and intense in a way that made her stomach flip. They were close enough that she could count his eyelashes, could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "That was—" Alexander started, then seemed to lose his words. "Unprofessional?" Madison suggested weakly. "Perfect," Alexander said firmly. "That was absolutely perfect." Madison felt heat bloom in her cheeks. It was pretty good, wasn't it? "Madison Clark," Alexander said, his voice low and amused. "You are the master of understatement." Before Madison could respond, Alexander's phone buzzed loudly against the desk, breaking the spell. They jumped apart like teenagers caught by parents, and Madison immediately felt the loss of his warmth against her skin. Alexander glanced at his phone with a frown. "Security system. Someone's in the building." "At this hour?" Madison checked her watch, surprised to see it was nearly 10 o'clock. They'd been talking for 3 hours without her noticing. "Probably the cleaning crew," Alexander said, but he moved to his computer and pulled up what appeared to be a security feed. "Though they usually don't come through until after 11. Madison watched as he scrolled through various camera angles, his expression growing more puzzled. "There," he said, pointing at a screen that showed a familiar figure moving through the cubicle area. "That's Tom from IT. Tom's here this late? That's what I'm wondering." Alexander's expression was thoughtful as he watched Tom move purposefully through the office, carrying what appeared to be a laptop bag. "He's heading toward the server room." Madison felt a prickle of unease. "Is that normal?" "Not really. IT maintenance is usually scheduled, and I didn't approve any after-hours system work." Alexander reached for his phone. "I should call down and check with him." But before he could dial, they watched Tom stop at Madison's desk. He set down his bag, pulled out what looked like a tablet, and began connecting it to Madison's computer. "What is he doing?" Madison asked, leaning closer to the screen. Alexander's expression had gone cold and sharp, all traces of warmth disappearing as his CEO instincts kicked in. "Something he shouldn't be doing." He was already moving toward the door. "Stay here." "Like hell," Madison said, following him. "That's my computer he's messing with." "Madison, if Tom is doing what I think he's doing, this could be dangerous." "Then you definitely shouldn't go alone," Madison said firmly. "Besides, I want to know what he was really looking for in my search history." Alexander paused at the elevator, studying her face. "You think this is connected to yesterday?" Tom was awfully interested in my internet activity, and he seemed to know a lot more about office gossip than a normal IT guy should. Madison's mind was racing, pieces clicking together. What if he wasn't just doing routine security checks? What if he was looking for something specific? Alexander finished grimly. Something someone paid him to find. The elevator ride down felt endless, tension crackling between them as they both processed the implications. If Tom was stealing data from Madison's computer, it meant someone thought she had access to information worth stealing. But what could a marketing coordinator possibly know that would be valuable enough to risk corporate espionage? Unless it wasn't about what she knew, but about who she'd been spending time with. "Alexander," Madison said quietly as the elevator doors opened. What if this isn't about my work? What if someone is trying to use my computer to get information about you? Alexander's jaw tightened. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. They moved quietly through the darkened office, using the cubicle walls for cover as they approached Madison's desk. Tom was still there, completely absorbed in whatever he was doing on his tablet. Up close, Madison could see cables running from the device to her computer and lines of code scrolling across the tablet screen. He's downloading everything, Alexander whispered, his voice tight with controlled anger. Madison felt violated in a way that went beyond professional concerns. Her computer contained not just work files, but personal documents, photos, private messages. The thought of Tom rifling through her digital life made her stomach churn. What do we do? She whispered back. We call security. And Tom looked up. For a moment, they all froze in a tableau of mutual surprise. Then Tom's expression shifted from shock to calculation, and Madison realized with growing alarm that he wasn't panicking like someone who'd been caught doing something wrong. He looked like someone whose plans had been slightly inconvenienced. Mr. Sterling, Tom said calmly, continuing to work on his tablet. I didn't expect you to be here this late. Tom, Alexander said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. Step away from that computer. I'm afraid I can't do that, sir. I'm in the middle of a very important data transfer. Unauthorized data transfer, Alexander corrected, moving closer. From an employee's personal workstation. That's corporate espionage, Tom. That's a federal crime. Tom's laugh was sharp and unpleasant. Corporate espionage is such an ugly term. I prefer competitive intelligence gathering. And technically, the data isn't for a competitor. Madison felt ice form in her stomach. Then who is it for? Tom glanced at her with something that might have been pity. People who are very interested in Mr. Sterling's personal communications, especially any communications that might suggest improper relationships with subordinates. The implication hit Madison like a physical blow. Someone was trying to gather evidence of her relationship with Alexander, evidence that could be used to damage his reputation or manipulate him. Who hired you? Alexander demanded, his voice deadly quiet. People with deeper pockets than yours, believe it or not, Tom said, then frowned at his tablet. Though this is taking longer than expected. Miss Clark, you really should use stronger passwords. Gerald 3 is embarrassingly easy to crack. Madison felt her face burn with embarrassment and fury. You went through my personal files. Just the work-related ones. Though I have to say, your Google search history is even more entertaining than advertised. Tom's grin was nasty. My employers will be particularly interested in the timeline. When exactly did you start researching ways to seduce your boss versus ways to fire him? Alexander moved so quickly that Madison barely saw him coming. One moment Tom was smirking at his tablet. The next, Alexander had him pinned against the cubicle wall with an expression that could have frozen fire. You have 10 seconds to tell me who you're working for, Alexander said, his voice conversational despite the violence radiating from his posture. And then I'm calling both building security and the FBI. Tom's confidence finally cracked. You can't prove anything. I'm just doing routine maintenance. The security cameras prove otherwise, Alexander said coldly, as does the tablet full of stolen data you're carrying. So I'll ask again, who hired you? But before Tom could answer, Madison heard the soft ding of the elevator arriving. Multiple sets of footsteps echoed across the empty office, moving purposefully in their direction. Expecting company? Tom asked, with a return of his earlier confidence. Alexander's expression went grim as he realized what was happening. Madison, get behind me. What, now? Madison moved without arguing, her heart pounding as she pressed herself against Alexander's back. She could feel the tension in his muscles, could hear the careful control in his breathing as he prepared for whatever was coming. 3 men in expensive suits emerged from behind the cubicle walls, moving with the predatory grace of people accustomed to violence. They weren't security guards or FBI agents. They looked like the kind of people who solved problems quietly and permanently. "Mr. Sterling," the lead man said politely. "So sorry to interrupt your evening. We just need to have a brief conversation about some business matters." "Business matters that require breaking into my building and stealing my employees' data?" Alexander asked, not moving from his protective position in front of Madison. "Business matters that require ensuring certain information doesn't become public," the man corrected smoothly. "Information that could be damaging to various parties." Madison felt the pieces click together with horrible clarity. Someone didn't just want to damage Alexander's reputation. They wanted leverage over him, something they could use to control his business decisions. And somehow, she'd become the key to that leverage. The office felt smaller, with 3 dangerous men occupying it, their presence turning the familiar space into something threatening and alien. Madison pressed closer to Alexander's back, drawing comfort from his solid warmth, even as her mind raced through increasingly terrible scenarios. "Let me guess," Alexander said, his voice carrying a calmness that Madison envied. "Richard Hale sent you." The lead man's smile was thin and predatory. "Mr. Hale is a businessman, Mr. Sterling. He understands the value of information, particularly information about the personal lives of his competitors." Madison felt Alexander's muscles tense at the mention of Hale's name. "What does Hale want?" "Simple. He wants you to reconsider your position on the Morrison Industries acquisition. A more collaborative approach to the negotiations would be beneficial for everyone involved." "And if I refuse?" The man's gaze shifted to Madison with unmistakable threat. "Then certain information about your relationship with Ms. Clark might find its way to the media. Information that could be quite damaging to both your professional reputation and her career prospects." Madison felt sick. She'd known this was dangerous territory, but she hadn't considered that their relationship could be weaponized against them. The thought of her private moments with Alexander being twisted into tabloid fodder made her want to hide under her desk. "You're assuming there's anything to find," Alexander said evenly. "Oh, we know there is," Tom interjected from where Alexander still had him pinned. "The security footage from tonight alone would make interesting viewing. Very romantic, that dinner setup. And the kiss." He made an exaggerated chef's kiss gesture. "Pure gold." Madison's face burned with humiliation and fury. They'd been watched, recorded, turned into ammunition for someone else's corporate power play. Every tender moment, every laugh, every honest conversation had been transformed into leverage. "What do you want?" Madison asked, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. The lead man looked pleased that she'd spoken. "We want Mr. Sterling to be reasonable. The Morrison acquisition is worth billions to Hale Industries. Surely Mr. Sterling's personal happiness is worth more than maintaining an aggressive negotiating position." "You want me to throw the deal," Alexander said flatly. "We want you to be collaborative, share the profits instead of trying to dominate the market." The man's tone was reasonable, as if he were discussing the weather rather than corporate blackmail. "Miss Clark seems like a lovely young woman. It would be a shame if her career were destroyed over something so preventable." Madison felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. These men thought they could use her as leverage against Alexander, thought she was some weak point they could exploit. They clearly didn't know her very well. "Actually," Madison said, stepping out from behind Alexander, despite his warning hand on her arm, "I have a better idea." "Madison," Alexander said quietly, "don't." "No, I think these gentlemen need to understand something," Madison continued, looking directly at the lead man. "You're assuming I'm some helpless victim who needs protecting, but you've clearly never read my personnel file very carefully." The man's confident expression faltered slightly. "Miss Clark, I don't think you understand the situation." "Oh, I understand perfectly. You want to blackmail Alexander using our relationship as leverage. You think threatening my career will make him cave to your demands." Madison's smile was sharp as broken glass. "But here's what you didn't consider. I don't care." "Madison," Alexander started. "Let me finish," Madison said firmly. "You can release whatever footage you want. You can tell the world that Alexander Sterling is dating his employee. You can make my life difficult, damage my reputation, whatever. But you're making one crucial mistake." "Which is?" the lead man asked, though he looked less confident than before. "You're assuming Alexander is the only one with power in this relationship." Madison pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. "What you don't know is that I've been documenting everything tonight. Every threat, every admission of corporate espionage, every detail of your blackmail scheme." She turned the phone screen toward them, showing a recording app that had been running. "This entire conversation is being uploaded to cloud storage as we speak, automatically, with copies being sent to the FBI, the SEC, and about 6 different journalists I know." The men exchanged uneasy glances. "You're bluffing," the lead man said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Madison's smile widened. "Want to test that theory? Because I should mention that I studied journalism before I went into marketing. I know exactly how to document a story and exactly who to send it to for maximum impact." Alexander was staring at her with something that looked like awe. "Madison, you brilliant, terrifying woman." "Besides," Madison continued, addressing the lead man again, "you've made another critical error in your planning." "Which is?" "You assumed that Alexander would choose his business interests over me. But you see, I already Googled ways to fire my billionaire boss and decided I'd rather keep him instead. Do you really think a little corporate blackmail is going to scare me away?" Tom started to move toward his tablet, probably to delete whatever data he'd stolen, but Alexander was faster. In one smooth motion, he grabbed the device and smashed it against the floor, sending pieces of expensive technology skittering across the carpet. "Oops," Alexander said mildly. "Butterfingers." The lead man's composure finally cracked. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Hale Industries has resources you can't imagine." "Funny thing about resources," Madison said conversationally. "They're only useful if you can use them without going to prison. And thanks to this recording, any move Hale makes against us now will be clearly documented as retaliation for our refusal to be blackmailed." "You think you're clever," the man snarled, "but there are other ways to apply pressure." "Are you threatening us?" Alexander asked, his voice deadly quiet. Before the man could answer, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing closer by the second. Tom looked panicked for the first time all evening. "Funny thing about security systems," Alexander said with satisfaction. "They automatically alert the police when someone tries to hack into them. I'm guessing the authorities will be here in about 60 seconds. The 3 men looked at each other, clearly calculating whether they could accomplish their mission and escape before the police arrived. Madison could see the moment they decided it wasn't worth the risk. "This isn't over," the lead man said as they began backing toward the stairwell. "Actually, it is," Madison called after them. "Because I'm a journalist at heart, and I never forget a good story. Hale Industries just became my new investigative target." The men disappeared into the stairwell just as the elevator doors opened to reveal building security and 2 uniformed police officers. Alexander moved smoothly into crisis management mode, explaining the situation with calm efficiency, while Madison stood beside him, still clutching her phone and trying to process everything that had just happened. "Ma'am," one of the officers said to Madison, "we'll need your statement about what occurred here tonight." "Of course," Madison said, then looked at Alexander. "Though I should probably mention that I don't actually know any journalists. I was kind of bluffing about that part." Alexander's laugh was rich and warm and full of relief. Madison Clark, you are absolutely terrifying when you're angry. I prefer effectively motivated, Madison replied with a grin. As the police took their statements, and Tom was led away in handcuffs, Madison found herself thinking about all her Google searches, all her career alternatives, all the ways she'd imagined escaping the complications of working for Alexander Sterling. She'd never imagined that instead of running away from those complications, she'd end up facing them down with a phone recording and a healthy dose of righteous fury. So, Alexander said, as they finally found themselves alone again in his office, the police having finished their initial investigation, how do you feel about dating someone whose business rivals occasionally resort to corporate espionage and blackmail? Madison considered the question seriously. Well, it's definitely more exciting than lighthouse keeping. That's not really an answer. Madison moved closer to him, close enough to see the concern in his gray eyes, the tension that lingered despite their victory tonight. Alexander, someone just tried to use me as leverage against you, and my first instinct was to fight back, not run away. What does that tell you? That you're braver than I deserve, Alexander said softly. It tells me that I'm exactly where I want to be, Madison corrected. Dangerous billionaire boss and all. Alexander's smile was slow and warm and full of promise. In that case, Madison Clark, would you like to continue this relationship despite the apparent occupational hazards? I thought you'd never ask, Madison said, reaching up to kiss him again. Outside the windows, the city sparkled with lights, but Madison barely noticed. She was too busy thinking that she'd finally found something better than all her Google search alternatives, a man who made her want to stop looking for escape routes and start planning adventures instead. 3 weeks later, Madison sat at her desk, trying to focus on quarterly reports, while stealing glances at Alexander's office. The glass walls that had once seemed intimidating now felt like windows into possibility, especially when she caught him looking back at her with that small smile that made her forget how to form coherent sentences. Their relationship had evolved into something beautifully complicated. By day, they maintained professional boundaries with a discipline that would have impressed military generals. Alexander was still the demanding CEO who pushed for excellence and impossible deadlines, and Madison was still the sharp-tongued marketing coordinator who delivered results with a side of creative problem-solving. But after hours, when the office emptied and the city lights began to twinkle, they became something else entirely. Two people discovering that they fit together in ways neither had expected. Earth to Madison, Jennifer from HR said, appearing beside her cubicle with a knowing smirk. You've been staring at that spreadsheet for 10 minutes without typing anything. Madison blinked, focusing on her computer screen where a half-finished budget analysis waited patiently for her attention. Sorry, just thinking through the numbers. Uh-huh, Jennifer said skeptically. Those must be some very interesting numbers, the kind that wear expensive suits and have corner offices. Madison felt her cheeks warm. I have no idea what you're talking about. Sure you don't, which is why you've been humming Disney songs all week, and why your coffee consumption has decreased dramatically now that someone keeps leaving fancy lattes on your desk. Those could be from anyone, Madison said weakly. Anyone who knows your exact coffee preferences remembers that you prefer cinnamon to vanilla and has access to the expensive cafe across, the street that requires a corporate account to deliver. Jennifer's grin was positively predatory. Face it, Clark, your poker face needs work. Before Madison could craft a denial, her computer chimed with a new email. The sender made her pulse quicken. sterlingindustries.com. The subject line was innocuously professional. Budget review meeting, 6 p.m. Madison opened the email, expecting work-related content, but found something that made her bite her lip to hide a smile. Ms. Clark, please bring the Morrison projections to my office at 6 p.m. for review. Also, I may have accidentally ordered enough Thai food for 6 people again. It would be a shame to let it go to waste. Regards, A. Sterling P.S. Gerald looks thirsty. You might want to water him. Madison glanced at her succulent, who did indeed look slightly wilted, then back at the email. 3 weeks of dating Alexander had taught her that he communicated in a careful code when they were at work, embedding personal messages in professional requests with a subtlety that would have impressed spy novelists. "Let me guess," Jennifer said, reading over Madison's shoulder with absolutely no shame. "Sudden urgent meeting that coincidentally occurs during dinner time." "It's a legitimate business meeting," Madison protested. "I'm sure it is. Just like all those other business meetings you've been having after hours." Jennifer's expression grew more serious. "Madison, I like you, and I like Mr. Sterling, so I'm going to give you some free advice." Madison tensed, preparing for a lecture about workplace relationships and professional boundaries. "Whatever you two are doing, you're handling it well. The office gossip mill has been working overtime trying to figure out if there's something going on, but you've both been so professional that even the most dedicated rumor mongers can't find anything concrete to work with." Madison blinked in surprise. "Really? Really? Though you might want to tell Mr. Sterling that ordering coffee for specific employees isn't exactly subtle. Tom's replacement in IT has been asking questions about delivery logs." The mention of Tom sent a chill down Madison's spine. The former IT specialist was currently facing federal charges for corporate espionage, and the investigation had revealed a network of corporate spies working for Hale Industries. The Morrison acquisition had gone through at Sterling Industries' original terms, largely because the FBI's involvement had made Hale too nervous to continue his aggressive tactics. "Speaking of Tom's replacement," Madison said, "how is Sarah working out?" "Sarah Kim? She's fantastic, hyper-competent, ethical, and she thinks your Google search history is hilarious rather than blackmail-worthy." Jennifer grinned. "She may have mentioned that your recent searches have become much more optimistic." Madison felt her face flame. "She's monitoring my internet activity, standard security protocol after the whole Tom situation. But don't worry, she's very discreet. Though she did ask me to tell you that how to date a CEO without ruining your career returned much more helpful results than how to fire your billionaire boss." "Oh God," Madison groaned, burying her face in her hands. "Is my entire digital life just entertainment for the IT department?" "Pretty much," Jennifer said cheerfully. "Though Sarah's rooting for you. She thinks Mr. Sterling is much happier these days, and she credits your influence." Madison peeked through her fingers. "He seems happier. Honey, the man whistled during a board meeting last week. Alexander Sterling has never whistled in his life. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." As if summoned by their conversation, Alexander emerged from his office, moving through the cubicle maze with his usual purposeful stride. He paused at Madison's desk, his expression professionally neutral despite the warmth in his gray eyes. "Ms. Clark, do you have the Morrison projections ready for our 6 o'clock meeting?" "Yes, sir," Madison said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "I've prepared a comprehensive analysis of the quarterly numbers." "Excellent. And remember to bring your recommendations for the Q4 strategy session." Alexander's lips quirked slightly. "I value your innovative perspective on problem solving." "Of course, Mr. Sterling. I'll make sure to think outside the box." Jennifer watched this exchange with poorly concealed amusement, clearly enjoying the subtext flying over everyone else's heads. After Alexander returned to his office, she leaned closer to Madison's cubicle. "You two are adorable," she said quietly, completely transparent to anyone paying attention, but adorable. Madison sighed, accepting defeat. "Are we really that obvious? To me? Yes. To most of the office? Probably not. You're both too good at maintaining professional facades." Jennifer's expression grew thoughtful. Though you might want to be careful about the rumor mill. There's been talk about Mr. Sterling's improved mood and your increased confidence, and people are starting to connect dots. What kind of talk? The kind where Sandra from accounting started a betting pool about when you two will make it official, and half the sales team thinks you're already secretly engaged. Madison stared at her. Engaged? Dave from sales swears he saw you wearing a ring last week, but I'm pretty sure that was just the class ring you wear on your right hand. Jennifer grinned. Though the engagement rumors did lead to some very creative speculation about secret weekend getaways and romantic corporate acquisitions. Romantic corporate acquisitions? According to the rumor mill, Mr. Sterling only pursued the Morrison deal so aggressively because you suggested it would be a good strategic move, and he's so smitten that he'll do anything to impress you. Madison burst out laughing despite her embarrassment. That's completely ridiculous. The Morrison acquisition was planned months before anything happened between us. I know that, and you know that, but office gossip doesn't concern itself with timelines or logic, Jennifer said pragmatically. The important thing is that most people think you're good for him, and that's worth more than you might realize. What do you mean? Jennifer's expression grew serious. Madison, Alexander Sterling inherited this company when he was 27 years old. He spent the last 5 years building it into an empire, but he's also built walls around himself that most people can't penetrate. The fact that you've gotten through those walls, that you've made him remember how to laugh and whistle and be human, that matters to people who care about him. Madison felt something warm and overwhelming settle in her chest. I don't think I've changed him that much. Maybe not changed, Jennifer conceded, but you've reminded him of parts of himself he forgot existed, and that's made him a better boss, a better leader, and probably a better man. Before Madison could respond, her computer chimed with another email, this one from Alexander's assistant Margaret. Mr. Sterling requests that you bring Gerald to tonight's meeting. He believes the plant might benefit from better lighting in his office. Madison stared at the message, then looked at her wilted succulent. He wants me to bring Gerald to our meeting. Jennifer read the email over her shoulder and grinned. Honey, when a billionaire CTO starts worrying about your plant's lighting needs, that's not professional concern. That's a man who's completely gone for you. Madison felt her heart do that familiar fluttery thing it always did when she realized how much Alexander cared about the details of her life. I think I'm in trouble, Jennifer. What kind of trouble? Madison looked toward Alexander's office, where she could see him on a conference call, his expression serious and focused as he discussed quarterly projections with someone on his speakerphone. But when he glanced in her direction, his entire demeanor softened for just a moment, his lips curving in a smile meant only for her. The kind where you realize you're falling in love with your billionaire boss and you wouldn't Google ways to fire him even if someone paid you to. Jennifer's grin was brilliant. Madison Clark, that's not trouble. That's a happy ending. At exactly 6 o'clock, Madison knocked on Alexander's office door, Gerald tucked under one arm, and a folder of Morrison projections under the other. The sight that greeted her when Alexander called for her to enter made her stop in her tracks and laugh out loud. Alexander's usually pristine office had been transformed into what could only be described as a botanical consultation center. A large grow light stood in the corner, several different types of plant food were arranged on his coffee table, and what appeared to be a humidity meter sat next to his computer monitor. Alexander himself stood behind his desk, wearing his usual expensive suit, but with reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied what looked like a gardening manual. "Did you buy out a garden center?" Madison asked, setting Gerald on Alexander's desk next to the humidity meter. "I may have done some research," Alexander admitted, looking slightly embarrassed but pleased with himself. Apparently succulents need very specific lighting conditions and watering schedules. Gerald's been surviving on office fluorescence and whatever attention you can spare between impossible deadlines. I thought he deserved better. Madison felt her heart melt completely. You researched plant care for Gerald? I researched plant care for you, Alexander corrected, moving around the desk to stand close enough that she could catch his familiar scent of expensive cologne and something uniquely him. Gerald just happens to be the beneficiary. Madison looked at the elaborate setup, at Alexander's earnest expression, at Gerald sitting proudly in his new place of honor. This is completely insane. I prefer thorough, Alexander said, echoing their ongoing joke. Besides, I figured if I'm going to steal you away for dinner meetings several times a week, the least I can do is make sure your plant doesn't suffer for it. Alexander, Madison said softly, you know I would have brought Gerald home if he needed better care, right? You didn't have to turn your office into a greenhouse. I know, Alexander said, his hand settling gently on her waist. But I wanted to. I wanted Gerald to be comfortable here because I'm hoping you'll both be spending more time in this office. Madison's pulse quickened. More time how? Instead of answering directly, Alexander moved to his desk and pulled out an official-looking folder. I have a proposition for you, Madison Clark. What kind of proposition? Madison asked, though her stomach was already fluttering with anticipation. The kind that starts with a promotion and ends with you having your own office with proper plant lighting and a coffee machine that doesn't require percussive maintenance to function. Madison stared at him. A promotion? Senior Strategic Analyst, Alexander said, opening the folder to reveal an official job description. You'd be working directly with me on major acquisitions and market expansion projects. Better pay, better benefits, and a position that actually matches your skill level instead of having you wasted in a cubicle writing reports that don't challenge you. Madison felt her knees go weak. Alexander, This is amazing, but, he prompted gently. But won't people think you're only promoting me because of what's happening between us? Alexander's expression grew serious. Madison, look at me. Really, look at me. She met his gray eyes, seeing the intensity and honesty there. I'm not offering you this promotion because you're sleeping with me, Alexander said firmly. I'm offering it because you're the smartest, most innovative analyst I've ever worked with, and keeping you in a junior position would be criminal negligence on my part as a CEO. But the timing is coincidental, Alexander interrupted. I've been planning this promotion since the Morrison acquisition. Your insights were crucial to that deal's success, and I've been waiting for the right opportunity to move you up. The fact that we've developed a personal relationship doesn't change your professional qualifications. Madison studied his face, looking for any sign that he was bending the truth to make her feel better. But Alexander's expression was completely sincere, and she realized that he was right. Her work spoke for itself, independent of whatever was happening between them personally. What would this mean for us? Madison asked quietly. For whatever this is we're doing? Alexander's smile was warm and slightly mischievous. Well, as a senior analyst, you'd be working much more closely with me. Longer meetings, more collaborative projects, occasional business trips to evaluate potential acquisitions. Alexander Sterling, Madison said, fighting back a grin. Are you engineering a situation where you get to spend more time with me under the guise of work? I prefer to think of it as optimizing our professional collaboration, while acknowledging that our personal compatibility enhances our working relationship, Alexander said with mock seriousness. That's a very fancy way of saying you want to date your business partner. Madison Clark, I want to date you in whatever capacity you'll allow. If you accept this promotion, I want to date my brilliant senior analyst. If you decide to stay in your current position, I want to date my brilliant marketing coordinator. If you decide to quit and become a lighthouse keeper, I want to date the most overqualified lighthouse keeper in maritime history. Madison burst out laughing. You'd really follow me to a lighthouse? I'd buy the lighthouse, Alexander said seriously, and install high-speed internet and a helicopter landing pad, because I'm not giving up either you or modern conveniences. You're completely ridiculous, Madison said, but she was smiling as she said it. I'm completely in love with you, Alexander said quietly, and the simple honesty of the statement made Madison's breath catch. They stared at each other for a moment, the weight of his words settling between them. Madison felt something warm and overwhelming bloom in her chest, a feeling so big and bright it threatened to overflow. Alexander, she whispered. I know it's too soon, he said quickly. I know we've only been doing this for 3 weeks, and I know it's complicated with the work situation and the power dynamics, and all the very sensible reasons why this is moving too fast. Madison stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, effectively silencing his nervous rambling. When they broke apart, Alexander looked dazed and hopeful and absolutely devastating in the soft light from Gerald's new grow lamp. I love you too, Madison said simply, and I accept the promotion. Alexander's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. Which part are you more excited about? The promotion gives me better job security and a salary that might actually cover my student loans, Madison said thoughtfully. But loving you, that's the part that makes me want to stop Googling career alternatives and start Googling things like how to be the best girlfriend to a billionaire CEO and what to wear to corporate galas when you're dating the host. Please tell me you actually Googled those things, Alexander said, laughing. I may have done some research, Madison admitted, though the results were disappointingly unhelpful. Apparently, the internet assumes that all billionaire girlfriends are already experts at corporate social events and designer fashion. Lucky for you, you're dating a billionaire who thinks you look perfect in everything from Target dresses to borrowed evening gowns, Alexander said, pulling her closer. Though I should probably warn you that dating me officially might involve more corporate events than you bargained for. Define more, Madison said suspiciously. Well, there's the quarterly shareholders meeting next month, the charity gala Margaret's been organizing for 6 months, and I may have accidentally agreed to host a networking dinner for the city's technology leaders. Madison groaned. How do you accidentally agree to host a dinner party? Very carefully, Alexander said with a grin. But Margaret assured me that all I have to do is show up in a tuxedo and make small talk. She's handling everything else. And you want me to come to these events as what, exactly? Your +1, your girlfriend, your senior analyst who happens to be sleeping with the CEO? Alexander grew serious, his hands coming up to frame her face gently. I want you to come as Madison Clark, the woman I love, in whatever capacity makes you comfortable. If you want to attend as my professional colleague, that's fine. If you want to attend as my girlfriend, that's fine too. If you want to skip them entirely and stay home with Gerald and a good book, I'll make excuses and join you. Madison felt her heart swell with affection for this man, who somehow managed to be both a powerful CEO and the kind of person who would skip corporate galas to read books with her in her plant. What if I want to attend as your girlfriend who also happens to be your brilliant senior analyst? Madison asked. Then I'll be the luckiest man at every event, Alexander said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. Though I should warn you that Margaret has very strong opinions about appropriate gala attire, and she's been dying to take someone shopping who actually appreciates fashion. Are you trying to scare me away or convince me to stay? I'm trying to prepare you for the reality of dating Alexander Sterling, he said seriously, which includes an assistant who considers you part of the family now, and who has already started planning our fictional wedding because she's convinced we're perfect for each other. Madison's eyes widened. Margaret is planning our wedding? Hypothetically, Alexander said quickly, very hypothetically, though she did mention that spring ceremonies photograph beautifully, and she's already identified 3 venues that could accommodate both intimate family gatherings and full corporate celebrations, depending on our preferences. Alexander, Madison said slowly, exactly how much has Margaret planned? Alexander looked sheepish. She may have prepared a comprehensive presentation, with charts. Madison stared at him for a moment, then burst out laughing. Your assistant made charts about our hypothetical wedding? Margaret is very thorough, Alexander said defensively. And she's been wanting me to settle down for years. She considers you a personal victory. This is insane, Madison said, but she was grinning as she said it. 3 weeks ago I was Googling ways to fire you, and now your assistant is planning our wedding with pie charts. Do you mind? Alexander asked, and there was something vulnerable in his voice that made Madison look at him more closely. Mind what? That Margaret's enthusiastic about your happiness? That she thinks we're good together? That she's apparently already planning centerpieces for an event that may never happen? Mind that I'm the kind of man whose life moves fast, whose assistant makes contingency plans for everything, whose idea of a quiet dinner involves ordering from 7 restaurants just to make sure you have something you like? Madison reached up to touch his cheek, feeling the slight roughness of his 5 o'clock shadow against her palm. Alexander, I mind that you think any of those things are problems, instead of proof that you care about details, that you have people in your life who want you to be happy, and that you go completely overboard trying to make sure I'm comfortable. Those are good things? He asked, leaning into her touch. Those are wonderful things, Madison said firmly. And if Margaret wants to make hypothetical wedding charts, she's welcome to make all the charts she wants. Just maybe don't show them to me until we've been dating for more than a month. Alexander's laugh was warm and relieved. Deal. Though I should probably warn you that she's also researched honeymoon destinations. Apparently, there are several lighthouse bed and breakfasts that offer excellent, romantic packages. Of course there are, Madison said, shaking her head in amazement. Your assistant is terrifyingly efficient. She's the best, Alexander agreed. Almost as terrifyingly efficient as you are when you're angry at corporate blackmailers. Madison grinned, remembering the night 3 weeks ago when she'd faced down Hale's men with nothing but a smartphone recording and righteous fury. I can't believe I threatened to investigate Hale Industries. You can't believe it? I can't believe you made them back down with sheer force of personality and creative use of technology. Alexander's expression grew admiring. That was the moment I knew I was completely gone for you. What? When I was bluffing about having journalist contacts? When you stepped out from behind me and decided to fight instead of hiding, Alexander said seriously. When you made it clear that you weren't going to let anyone use you as leverage against me, even if it meant putting yourself at risk. That's when I knew you weren't just someone I was falling for. You were someone I wanted to build a life with. Madison felt tears prick at her eyes. Alexander, I know it's fast, he said again, but I also know what I want. And what I want is you, Madison Clark, in every possible way. Madison felt something warm and certain settle in her chest, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Fast doesn't necessarily mean wrong, she said softly. Sometimes it just means right. Alexander's smile was soft and wondering, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. So you'll take the promotion. You'll let me spoil Gerald with expensive grow lights. You'll come to corporate galas and let Margaret fuss over your dress choices. I'll take the promotion because I've earned it, Madison said firmly. I'll let you spoil Gerald because it's adorable and he deserves better lighting. And I'll come to corporate galas because I want to be there with you, not because I have to be. And the part where I love you? Madison stood on her tiptoes again, her arms winding around his neck. The part where you love me is my favorite part of this whole ridiculous situation. Alexander kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, Madison rested her forehead against his, both of them smiling like teenagers with their first crush. "So," Madison said eventually, "about this dinner you ordered for 6 people." "Right," Alexander said, glancing toward the sitting area where takeout containers waited. "I may have gotten slightly carried away again." "Define slightly." "Well, there's Thai food, obviously, since that worked so well last time. But then I thought you might want Italian, so I ordered from that place downtown. And then I remembered you mentioned liking Indian food, so there's curry and sushi because I wanted to try something new, and I may have gotten barbecue because I was curious about your opinions on regional sauce preferences." Madison stared at him. "You ordered food from 5 different cuisines?" 6, Alexander corrected sheepishly. "I also got Greek food, because the restaurant had excellent reviews, and I thought we could make it a cultural exploration evening." "Alexander," Madison said slowly, "that's enough food for a small army." "I know, but I wanted options, and I wanted tonight to be special." His expression grew more serious. "This feels like the beginning of something important, Madison. I wanted to mark the occasion appropriately." Madison felt her heart melt completely. "You think tonight is the beginning?" "Tonight is the night you said you loved me back," Alexander said simply. "Tonight is the night you agreed to build something real with me. Promotion and corporate galas, and Margaret's wedding charts included. If that's not a beginning worth celebrating with excessive amounts of takeout food, I don't know what is." Madison laughed, shaking her head in amazement. "You're going to make me gain 20 pounds with all this food spoiling." "I'll love you at any weight," Alexander said seriously, "though I should probably work on my portion control for future romantic gestures." "Don't you dare," Madison said quickly. "Your complete inability to order reasonable amounts of food is charming. It's like you're so excited about everything that you can't contain yourself." "That's actually a very accurate description of how I feel about you," Alexander admitted. "Completely unable to contain myself." Madison grinned. "Good. I like you uncontained." They spent the next hour working their way through the impressive spread of food, while Alexander told her about the strategic analyst position in more detail. The role was everything Madison had dreamed of professionally: challenging work, creative problem-solving, direct involvement in major business decisions, and a salary that would finally allow her to pay off her student loans and maybe even afford an apartment with a dishwasher. "There is one potential complication," Alexander said, as they shared a container of excellent pad thai. "What kind of complication?" "The position involves travel. Site visits for potential acquisitions, client meetings, industry conferences. Sometimes international trips that last a week or more." Madison considered this. "And you're worried I won't want to travel for work?" "I'm worried about how it will affect us," Alexander said honestly. "Business trips are part of the job, but there are also opportunities for us to work together outside the office. I don't want you to feel like I'm using the position to manipulate our personal time." Madison set down her chopsticks and looked at him directly. "Alexander, are you asking me if I'm okay with occasionally traveling for work with my boyfriend, who also happens to be my boss?" "When you put it like that, it sounds somewhat inappropriate," Alexander admitted. "It sounds like a potential perk," Madison corrected. "Do you know how many couples struggle to find time together because of conflicting work schedules? You're offering me a job where part of my professional responsibilities include spending time with you in interesting cities, evaluating business opportunities. That's not a complication. That's a romance novel fantasy." Alexander's relief was visible. "You really think so?" "I think you're overthinking this," Madison said gently. "Yes, dating your boss is complicated. Yes, there will be challenges and rumors, and probably some awkward HR conversations in our future. But Alexander, look at us. Look at how well we work together, how we balance each other out, how we make each other better at what we do. We do work well together, Alexander agreed. We do. And that's not going to change just because we're sleeping together and you buy excessive amounts of takeout food to express your feelings. Alexander laughed. Is that how I express my feelings? Among other methods, Madison said with a grin, though the grow light for Gerald was particularly eloquent. They looked over at the succulent, who was already looking perkier under his new lighting setup. Alexander had positioned him perfectly to catch both natural light from the windows and the specialized grow light, and Gerald seemed to approve of his upgraded accommodations. He really does look better already, Madison observed. Plants respond well to proper care and attention, Alexander said, not unlike people. Madison felt something warm spread through her chest at the implication. Is that your secret to successful relationships? Proper care and attention? I wouldn't know, Alexander said honestly. You're my first attempt at a serious relationship. I'm making it up as I go along and hoping that good intentions and excessive food ordering will compensate for my lack of experience. Madison reached across the small table and took his hand. Alexander, you don't need to compensate for anything. You're doing just fine. Am I? You are. You listen when I talk. You remember things that matter to me. You go completely overboard trying to make me happy, and you make me laugh every single day. Those are the things that matter in a relationship, not some imaginary rule book about proper dating etiquette. Alexander squeezed her hand gently. What about you? Any relationship wisdom you'd like to share? Madison considered the question seriously. Honestly, I think the most important thing is that we're both choosing this. Not because it's convenient or expected or professionally advantageous, but because we genuinely enjoy each other's company and want to see where this goes. Even with all the complications. Especially with all the complications, Madison said firmly. Easy things aren't usually worth having. And you, Alexander Sterling, are definitely worth having. Alexander's smile was soft and grateful and completely devastating to Madison's remaining emotional defenses. Madison Clark, you are going to be the death of my professional reputation and the making of my personal happiness. That sounds like a fair trade, Madison said, leaning across the table to kiss him again. When they finally broke apart, Madison glanced at the clock and was surprised to see it was nearly 10 o'clock. They'd been talking and eating and falling deeper in love for 4 hours without noticing the time pass. I should probably head home, Madison said reluctantly. Emma will start texting me worried messages if I don't show up soon. Or, Alexander said carefully, you could stay. Madison's pulse quickened. Stay how? However you want. We could keep talking, or watch something on Netflix, or I could show you the view from the penthouse level. No pressure, just, I'm not ready for tonight to end yet. Madison looked into his gray eyes, seeing hope and desire and careful patience there. She thought about her tiny apartment with its questionable heating and Emma's inevitable interrogation about how the evening had gone. Then she thought about staying here with Alexander, about falling asleep in his arms and waking up to the city skyline and maybe making breakfast together before work. I'd like that, Madison said softly. I'd like to stay. Alexander's smile was brilliant. Really? Really. Though I should probably text Emma so she doesn't call the police when I don't come home. Of course. And Madison? Yeah? Thank you. For what? Alexander gestured around his office, at the remains of their elaborate dinner, at Gerald thriving under his new grow light, at the two of them sitting together, surrounded by the evidence of his complete inability to do anything halfway. For not Googling ways to fire me when I turned out to be the kind of man who expresses his feelings through excessive takeout orders and plant care research. Madison laughed, her heart so full it felt like it might overflow. Alexander, if this is what loving you looks like, I never want to Google anything else again." 6 months later, Madison would look back on that evening as the night her real life began, the night she stopped looking for escape routes and started planning adventures instead. The night she realized that sometimes the best things happen when you're brave enough to stop running away and start running toward something better. But that night, all she knew was that she was exactly where she wanted to be, with exactly the right person, building exactly the kind of life she'd never thought to Google because she'd never imagined it could be real. It was, she thought, as Alexander helped her gather Gerald and his new grow light for the trip to his penthouse, infinitely better than lighthouse keeping. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories, and check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.